Yeah, I think we are live. मैं बस चेक कर लेता हूँ सर एक बार किसी से. Think we should be audible. Um, Hello. Okay, so welcome everyone. Today evening we have with us once again Dr. Vineet Ahuja, who is a professor of gastroenterology at AIMS New Delhi. And last time we had a talk with him where he explained the role of FMT in IBD. And this time he will be answering some frequently asked questions and telling us more about some of the most common concerns of patients who are diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease. So first of all, thank you, sir, for giving us your precious time and coming, talking to us once again. Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you, Nikhil, and it's always a pleasure. You don't have to thank me. It's always a pleasure to interact with all of you.
Thank you,
I
sir.
look forward to it, always.
Yes, sir. So shall we begin, sir?
Yeah, sure, absolutely.
Okay, sir. So the first thing that comes to the mind of any patient who's diagnosed with IBD,
Hmm.
and often I think that any patient, including me, like we ask this ourselves at many points in life, like, was it our fault? Did we do this? How could it happen to us? Because many of us were never sick, and the first disease that we get is IBD. So, did we do something to ourselves that caused this, or like what? How did this happen?
So that's a very interesting question. So, and I have a part answer to it, right? The Okay, the first thing I can say very clearly is obviously it's not anything that you have done to yourself which has caused this disease. There is absolutely no way in which you can blame yourself for this disease or something like that. But why is it that these diseases are happening? If you look at it and take the look at the historical perspective, so what you would find is that when we talk about IBD, it's ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. And actually, if you look at it, then Crohn's disease, it was first described in 1913. Subsequently, the description came up in 1932. So the descriptions came very recently. There may be a few case reports prior to that, but the first case series came up in 1932. In fact, in India, till 30 years back, when I was a medical student, if in my undergraduate exam or a postgraduate exam, I would make a diagnosis of Crohn's disease, it was the examiner would say that to fail this candidate, he really does not know his basics. Because at that time, Crohn's disease was definitely uncommon in our country. So, what has happened over past few decades has been there has been a change in the epidemiology of diseases. There has been the change in the kind of diseases which afflict the community or the population. So, for example, we had a lot of infectious diseases. Now, infectious diseases are seen, but less commonly seen. Although last year changed the paradigm again, once again, when it was a disease, the world was rocked by an infectious disease. So, it is like non-communicable diseases are replacing the communicable diseases. So, when we talk about non-communicable diseases, then it is a non-communicable disease in every specialty of medicine. If it is endocrinology, then they are seeing a lot of diabetics. If it is neurology, they are seeing a lot of multiple patients with multiple sclerosis. Again, young people, they get afflicted with multiple sclerosis. In gastroenterology, you're again looking at inflammatory bowel disease. So, the very interesting way to explain this would be that when we look at, we say that okay, Indians were not predisposed to ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease because these diseases were not seen so commonly earlier. But at the same time, a lot of people keep on getting, they migrate to UK, they migrate to USA. UK and USA are the high prevalence areas for IBD. IBD has been traditionally considered as a disease of the Western Caucasian population. कि वहाँ का की बीमारी है ये. When Indians migrated to UK and USA, so somebody did a study whereby they looked at Leicestershire. Leicestershire में उन्होंने देखा कि first generation Indians, second generation Indians. Okay? What was the incidence of ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease? How many of them developed ulcerative colitis, and compared it with the native British population की उनमें कितना incidence है और इनमें कितना होता है? Because people thought कि Indians, South Asians, Indians, Bangladeshi, Sri Lankans, इसमें तो नहीं होना चाहिए ये. And what they realized was that people who had migrated out there, they were getting ulcerative colitis almost as commonly as the native Brit population, and subsequently their children were even getting it at a higher rates. The same thing was seen in Canada. So when there is a frame shift in terms of that, you change the whole scenario. So you have a different kind of lifestyle. You have a food which is totally westernized. You have a high fat diet, you have a high sugar diet, you have a lot of processed food. That is the time when these diseases seem to come up. But then you cannot implicate only the diet for that. It is a whole frame shift of what is known as a hygiene hypothesis. When hygienic conditions improve a lot, then instead of providing benefit, it is quite possible they may be giving rise to the non-communicable diseases. That is a phenomena which you have been seeing. Right? So, if you say that you are responsible, any of us is responsible, no, it is not. This is how the evolution of disease has been there in the world. When industrial revolution was there, because living conditions were so poor, so at that time there were a lot of communicable diseases. Plague was there were a lot of communicable diseases at that time, and those caused havoc at that time. Now the hygienic conditions have improved. So in the same areas where tuberculosis was seen much more, where infectious disease was seen, they are seeing a lot more non-communicable diseases. So that is probably the reason. And in fact, if you want to talk about it scientifically, then scientifically, IBD is considered to be an aberrant immune response. Our body has an immune system by which how it reacts like. So that immune system, which it's supposed to behave in a very good manner, in a nice manner, in a tolerant manner, it starts behaving very aggressively. And it may be behave aggressively towards even the microbe which are in the gut. Those microbes which will be friendly to us, those are known as commensals. So it starts reacting against them. As a result, there would be inflammation. There would be a little amount of genetic predisposition also. You would see that for some people, IBD runs in families also, but that is not a large percentage. For a majority of them, it's a change in the environment, subsequently an aberrant immune response, which causes chronic persistent inflammation. That is why in, let's say, Africa, you would not find so much of IBD. It is just like as the GDP of a country rises, you would find more and more of not only IBD but multiple sclerosis and all the other non-communicable diseases.
So, sir, you talked about diet. So, my next question is related to that. So, how much of a role do my lifestyle and two most discussed factors, diet and stress, play when it's come to the level of severity of my condition and the frequency with which I have flare-ups and my long-term prognosis?
So, when we talk about three factors which may be important in terms of causing IBD, those three factors are: one is genetic predisposition, which I told you is responsible for a small fraction. But genetic predisposition is something we cannot change. Second is aberrant immune responses, which may occur again. And third part is change in the environment. And the most important factor in environment would be the change in your gut microbiome. Gut microbiome, which as a result because of inflammation, or it may be also be causing the inflammation. It could be any way. It could be the cause or the effect, in the sense that it could be the effect of inflammation, or it could be causing inflammation. So that gut microbiome, when it changes, it could be causing the flares and all those kind of things, which could be possible. Now, gut microbiome, if we go one step higher, gut microbiome is dictated by what you eat. Whatever diet you are taking, that would have an effect on gut microbiome. So that point tells us that logically, diet should play a major role in IBD. Second thing, as I told you about, that as there is a frame shift in environment, in other words, you're going towards westernized diet, high fat diet, high sugar diet, then these diseases seem to come up. That tells you diet has an important role to play. Third is agrarian diet. Wherever it has been, IBD is still not very common. Where there is low GDP, you find that there is more of agrarian lifestyle. So it is the non-processed food is not there. It is healthy, good diet. So diet has a major role to play. One. At the same time, to think that diet is a be all and end all, that has not been proven. And at the same time, we do not have any interventional data. When I say interventional data, is trials available, which will show that, okay, you change the diet completely, go to a plant-based diet, then you're certain that the patient would improve. That kind of definite data is not there. So where I would place it is that diet has an important role to play. One, healthy diet is important from perspective of any disease. It is not only IBD. But if you are going to get too restrictive about your diet, thinking that diet is the only incriminating factor, then you would be wrong about it. It is just that hygienic diet is required, more of fruits and vegetables, that would be good for you. Then you have to think in the terms of ratios of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. As it is, you know that people are talking about high sugar being or sugar being the new tobacco. So high sugar as such is bad for any kind of disease. So if you have a healthy diet, that should be good enough. Now the second question you would ask is, should it be vegetarian diet or a non-vegetarian diet? That is another thing which comes to mind. So logically, plant-based diet is something which should be more useful, because probably that will not elicit an antigenic response or something like a food allergic response so much, maybe. However, at the same time, if you look at where all IBD is there, then in India we find that, let's go to Ladakh. Now Ladakh, the predominant diet out there is non-vegetarian. That also in winter months, they do not have any fresh fruits and vegetables at all. So they store their stuff and they eat it. But is IBD common out there? No. In last 12-15 years, we have been putting up health camps out there. We haven't seen a case of IBD. Maybe now we would see, but till now we haven't. Let's look at the communities in India which are predominantly vegetarian. Is it that they do not have IBD? No. You would find communities which are very much vegetarian in India. There also IBD cases would be there. So it is not as simple as vegetarian diet or non-vegetarian diet. It is probably high fat, high sugar, more of processed food, which along with other things leads towards this disease or leads towards exacerbation of this disease. Is milk harmful for IBD? Not necessarily. It depends from individual to individual. If somebody has lactose intolerance, milk would not agree with them. They would have bloating, they would have increased stool frequency. That's not because of IBD. That's because of lactose intolerance. However, if milk agrees, somebody does not have lactose intolerance, then they can take milk even if. Okay. Similarly, curd is excellent because it has all the probiotics and all. So what is happening is that diet was earlier pushed absolutely to the background. People thought diet is not at all important. Now we have reached till this stage where we feel, yes, diet is important, but what is the crucial thing in diet we are trying to figure out. And maybe over next 2-3 years, we'll get clearly more data whether a plant-based diet is going to be really helpful or not. And so at this moment, we cannot definitely say that.
And so what about stress? Like people who have a lot of stress in their life, maybe physical, maybe emotional stress, or they are working a very stressful job. So is there any study that correlates the incidences of IBD or because many of us feel that when we are stressed, our symptoms tend to worsen. So how's that linked to IBD?
If you ask me between diet and stress, I would say diet is a much more important factor.
Okay.
When we talk about stress does lead to change in the gut motility. This is a common thing. When you're a kid, you're going for exam, you may get abdominal pain before an exam, or you would get a diarrhea before an exam, or something like that. So so stress can change the gut motility. But whether stress can predispose to inflammation or initiate inflammation, I don't think so. I don't believe in that. So stress can cause irritable bowel kind of features, And in any patient with IBD, you may have irritable bowel features superimposed. Once that is superimposed, you perceive that it is stress which is leading to increase in IBD activity, which probably may not be true. Stress would be causing more of GI motility. More important than stress is mental health, because IBD is a chronic disease. Relapses, remissions, it affects people when they're prime of their youth, right? So obviously it plays havoc with their mind. So they have to be very, very resilient to face it. So mental health obviously is a very, very important issue. And that is an unaddressed issue till now. That is another issue which is often put under the carpet. Let's look at the GI inflammation. Anxiety ठीक हो जाएगी, वो ठीक हो जाएगा, but that's not true. You have to treat holistically. So you have to address it head on. The patients of IBD made it's natural for them to develop a little bit of depressive features. If they develop, then you have to treat for it instead of thinking that it will go away. So that is the fine line between stress and mental health. So if you ask me, stress is important, yes, but stress will not cause inflammation. Diet, can it reduce inflammation? Yes, possibly. So diet is much more important than stress. Mental health, quality of life, mental health is extremely important.
So the third most popular question is, what is the quickest way to achieve remission?
Quickest way to achieve remission is that you have to, I would approach it at 2 or 3 layers, right? First layer is a simple layer that, okay, you go to a doctor, preferably a gastroenterologist, because these are specialized diseases. And if it is a complicated case of IBD, then preferably to a person who is dealing more and more with IBD cases. Secondly, to trust the doctor once you've gone to a doctor. Not, you can Google, but the more you Google, the more you'll confuse yourself. So to trust the instincts of the doctor and then adhere to the medicines, whatever medicines they give it to you, because it's very difficult to take so many medicines and regularly. It is easy for the doctor to write, okay, if the doctor is not a good communicator, in fact, what I would say is that it will always choose a doctor who's a good communicator also. If the doctor is willing to spend time with you, the moment the doctor is willing to spend time with you, that means there's some empathy. If there's some empathy, that empathy is going to bear fruit. So because if only medicines are written and you then decide whether to take medicines or not, you do not know whether to take for few days you'll take it, then you'll get tired because of the discipline, popping a pill in the morning, afternoon, evening, taking a suppository or something, it becomes very tiring. Then you may leave it. The moment you leave it, then you're causing harm to yourself. So the quickest way for remission is select the appropriate doctor. Once you have selected the appropriate doctor, then stick to that doctor for some time. Have some faith, right? Number 3, adhere to the medicine protocol, whatever the medicine protocol is there. Third. Fourth, the second layer, which is very important again, is your mental health and your power of resilience. There's nothing, any chronic disease, resilience is the single most power. The motivational power in you, the inspiration in you, the resilience in you is the single most power which will decide you whether you're heading towards positive health or not. Rest all are obviously going to help.
Yes, sir. And sir, there are a number of other concerns around remission also. So does remission mean that I'll have absolutely no symptoms?
No, unfortunately, no. So it is like, for example, once we did a study, so whereby around 80-90 patients who were in absolute remission. Their remission is, you would be hearing terms like you talked about it also. That is the clinical remission is a deep remission. You put down that in the question.
Yeah, next question is that.
So let me tell you out here only. So now you're talking, because what has happened is that the goals of the IBD, the good thing about is that in terms of therapy, we are moving very, very fast now. A lot of new drugs are coming in. So that offers you the opportunity to change the natural course of the disease. Earlier till now, what was happening is, okay, fine. If we can control symptoms, that should be sufficient. So that the person does not have diarrhea, person does not have rectal bleed or pain, and all that should be. Then it is whether you can heal the mucosa inside the intestinal lining. There should be no ulcers out there. Then is not only you heal the mucosa when you see by an endoscope, but if you take a biopsy from there, then also you do not find any sign of inflammation out there. So earlier the goal was symptomatic treatment, let's say 30 years back. Then 20 years back, it became okay, clinical remission. Clinical remission means that the patient does not have any bowel frequency more than 1 or 2 times more than normal and no blood at all. Then came up the terms like deep remission, that is clinical remission plus endoscopic remission, that you find that mucosa is also healed outside. Then is complete remission. Complete remission is clinical remission, mucosal remission, endoscopic remission, plus if you take a biopsy, there also there is no activity. So obviously, the more less activity is out there, the less the chances are the relapse would be there. That in a way tells you this is tighter control. If there's tighter control, obviously things should be better. But are they going to? It is it 100% foolproof? No, it is not 100%. Like as I was telling you, the 80 or 90 patients we followed up for 1 year who were in complete remission. Yeah, like the stool frequency was one, no blood. You did a endoscopy, colonoscopy. There was no change out there. You took a biopsy. There was no inflammation. But after at 1 year, still around 10 or 12, 10 patients out of them relapsed. So that is a natural history of the disease. So the natural history of the disease, some people may have very continuous flares, some people may have one flare and then the disease settles down. But to expect that the disease will totally settle down is, in the sense that you have to be very, very lucky for it.
Yes. Okay, so next question was related to the clinical remission, but I think you explained it well. So we'll move on. So once someone has achieved remission, how do they stay that way? How do they maintain that remission and like reduce the risk of flaring up again or having a relapse?
So once you get the remission, then the best way is that is a thing called as adherence. That adherence means compliance. Are you going to take your treatment regularly or not? Because in general, once we are fine, then we get happy. Once you get happy, you relax, you let your guard down. And at the same time, you feel, why do I have to take so many medicines when I'm doing well? Now, 3 months, 6 months, I'm doing well. And this particularly happens more with people who are well educated or professionals. So this is another, we looked at all our patients and then somebody sat down, made a questionnaire and took an interview. And it was seen that the illiterate people whom we thought would be the one not adhering to medicine, in the sense that they would not maybe know the importance, or perhaps the low socioeconomic group, because they'll not be able to buy the medicine, so they may be stopping the medicine. That's a genuine reason. But what we found was the well qualified professionals who had the higher education status, they were the ones who were not adhering to medicine, because they felt that okay, we can Google, we'll try this, we'll try that, we'll try alternative, and they're also right in a way. I'm not blaming their philosophy about it, but I think till now, with whatever advances we have made in IBD, it is very clear that we do not have a one-stop treatment. We do not have a medicine which cures. We have medicines which control. It's like hypertension. If somebody has blood pressure, they have to take medicine. Somebody has diabetes, they have to take medicines. If you stop the medicine, then sugar would rise. Similarly, in IBD, the effect that the bad effect will not come within a day, 2 days, may not come for 3 months, for 6 months. So that will give you a sense of confidence. I've stopped all medicines and still look, I'm doing well. So see, that's a good strategy. But no, when the relapse comes, it comes with a vengeance.
Yeah.
So
Yes, sir. So related to that, so many patients ask that like, can they ever live a med-free life? And if they have not had symptoms in a couple of years, 1 year, 2 year, 3 साल हो गए, कुछ नहीं हुआ है, so can they just stop their meds and forget about IBD? And जब आएगा तब देखेंगे दोबारा ऐसा कुछ, like can they adopt this philosophy?
So जिसका बहुत लिमिटेड डिजीज होता है ना, जैसे फॉर एग्जांपल अल्सरेटिव कोलाइटिस में वी से दैट इट इज इन्वॉल्विंग ओनली 15 centimeters of rectum known as proctitis. There for 2 or 3 years, if somebody has been in complete remission, then they can think perhaps of stopping therapy, right? But for the rest of the patients, I don't think it's a good idea to stop all medicines. Yes, you can de-escalate a therapy. There's a difference between the two. If you're taking 5 medicines or 3 medicines, it's not necessary that you need to take all medicines. So when we're talking about remission, all the principles of remission, that is another problem, another very important principle. One is adherence from the side of the person who's taking the medicine. Second is from the clinician side to optimize the therapy. If somebody is on 3 medicines, doesn't mean they have to be on 3 medicines all along. You can decrease the number of medicines and give 1 or 2 and add, reduce it to one type of medicine only, and add the second class of drugs in case there is a relapse. So there are exit strategies available, there are de-escalation strategies available for every kind of medicine. Whether it is, for example, if somebody is taking biologics, then it is not necessary for them, okay, we give them azathioprine all along, or we give them mesalamine all along. If somebody is taking azathioprine and mesalamine for 5-10 years, then we can think of stopping one of them. If somebody is taking suppositories and enemias and oral 5-ASA, after some time we can stop 1 or 2 of them. Biologics also can be stopped after 1 year or something. So for every drug, you need to optimize the therapy. That is there. So I would say that yes, to stop completely, till now, I don't think we have any drug which cures. Even for example, when we talk about FMT, there also it controls for some time. Biologicals, however expensive they may be, they control for some time. By the way, that reminds me, there's a drug which is now available in India, tofacitinib, which gives almost similar efficacy as biologics.
Yes.
It's an oral drug, and we are very fortunate in our country that it is very, very reasonable. It is expensive in Western countries, and obviously out here, they whatever like patent laws or whatever they, I don't know, but it is as reasonable as 5 years.
Yes, sir. Last
So
time
it is a
so
big
Saurabh
boon
talked
for
about
our
this.
patients, particularly like for our center where most of our patients cannot afford too many medicines. So obviously they cannot afford biologics. And at our center, biologics are available if somebody has a below poverty line card. Otherwise, they are not easily available. So now you have an alternative, which is offers the same kind of advantage and at minimum at the cost of a mesalamine tablet. So I think that's one of the big, very big things which has for our IBD patients. Like we're really glad that we have this opportunity available for us, whereby when we need to treat them, and obviously there are resource constraints, then you really don't know what to do, then you have another agent available which can be used.
Yes, sir. Last time Dr. Saurabh Keria told us about the drug. And what I'd like to ask here is, like you said, that there are exit strategies and you can de-escalate and we can maybe change the doses, anything. So, like some patients who are hearing you, so they might think that, okay, maybe I can do it myself. So do you recommend that? Like,
So
just
I'll tell you
because
some
that you said.
personal. Okay, I'll tell you some. Try to remember some experiences from the center and tell you. Many patients they go for alternative therapy in between, and so they do well. ऐसा नहीं है, because every system of medicine has its merits. But at the same time, I have not seen any system of medicine which has been providing cure for this disease. So these patients often they ask us, we say, okay, you want to switch over to any other system of medicine, please go ahead and do that. We have no issues. So they keep on following. 6 months they'll do well, 1 year they do well. Again they have a relapse and they come back. Then they decide, okay, let's follow this system of medicine only. So the moment you change or something, you may have some benefit, but doesn't mean that till now I have not found. For example, I'll give you example of 2 patients again now out here, because there would be certain outliers also. For example, one young boy, like, right, he had Crohn's disease, and obviously he had to be put on azathioprine, and we were planning biologics and all. So he was doing well, but partially controlled and all. But he decided to go for Tibetan system of medicine, which is fine. So he went there, took the Tibetan system of medicine, and for next 2-3 years he has been doing fine. There's no doubt about that. He's been doing fine. So there's another young lady at that moment also who had ulcerative colitis. So what happens is patients, when they're sitting outside, they talk to each other.
Yeah.
And obviously that is the best source of information. And that is where I really commend you people for coming up with this kind of group, because this would really help in for you to have the support group, and that transmits knowledge and good practices. So when she heard about it, she asked her, I said, just please go ahead and try it in case you want to. But in her case, it did not work at all. She had to be taken up for surgery very soon. So you have the different experience, but in general, for a vast majority of patients, I would say they might have had a remission for a few months, but if they stop taking medicines or they've not taking the regular medication, they do have a relapse after a period of time. Some patients, the relapse may occur after 3 4 years also. It depends from person to person. It's not a very consistent disease. But if the disease is extensive, then it should not be tried at all. If disease is very limited, as I said, proctitis, and somebody has been in remission for 2 to 3 years, then it may be worth a trials maybe. Again, we're checking every 3 to 6 months, okay, if there has been any relapse or not, that would be there. But otherwise, I don't think we have reached till that stage where we can manage only with diet without any drugs for a long period of time without expecting progression of the disease.
So basically, like there's a lot of factors that influence this decision, and like there's always some uncertainty even after doing well, if you, even if you are doing well since a long time. Yeah. So the next question was related to that alternative medicine. So many people talk about curing that IBD and going into long-term remission with alternative medicine and different kind of diets without taking any allopathic meds. So many people
You
want to
can,
try the same thing. So they often ask, so what would your
yeah,
advice be?
you can try it out, but remember, there's no cure in any system. This much with our experience, we can tell you there's no cure. No. Yes, controlling inflammation can be there. Even in certain basic compounds, the phytosteroids, they may be helping in control. There can be anything which can control inflammation for a certain period of time. However, it is best to go along the strategies whereby you are able to. It depends again. Some people I have seen, they may be having symptoms, but they are able to bear those symptoms and still not go for any kind of therapy. So as long as they are able to bear it, fine. Otherwise, it is always better to have a programmed therapy, so much so that the therapy should not be overdoing the thing in terms of taking too many medicines or having toxicity of the medicine. Couple it with good practices. Good practices, exercise. Some of the IBD patients become obese, I've seen. So obesity is a bad factor. Like malnutrition is obviously a bad factor that has to be corrected. Obesity is a bad factor which has to be corrected. Or they may have low muscle mass which needs to be corrected. Or they may be from the diet point of view, they may be eating all the wrong things which needs to be corrected. Exercise is very important. So it is a culmination of all these factors, and mental health, as I told you. So each one of them is a platform or a pillar, I would say, for a platform. So if you are having good diet, if you are having good vitamin D, sunshine or good vitamin D, mental health, resilient, positive outlook, adherence to medication, taking care of malnutrition, that you should not be malnourished, muscle mass should be better, then obviously you are as close to in terms of achieving a long term remission as much as possible. And the good part is that we have seen the field evolving so rapidly that I really would not be surprised if in just 2 3 years or 3 4 5 years or whatever, it depends. Obviously, nobody can predict that there is a cure available. You don't know. For example, although it's not an infectious disease, but then there's a famous story about peptic ulcer disease, ulcer, simple ulcer, जो stomach में होता है. So stomach ulcer was always what did people think this ulcer was? There were 600 pages books which are written in 1970s, 80s, where they talked about, okay, ulcer is because of obsessive mothers, ulcer is because of stress, ulcer is because of no job, bad family, this, that, right? Till in 1982, an intern is the person who is in the final year of MBBS. He wanted to do a summer job. So he wanted to do a summer job. So he went up to his professor of pathology and said that, okay, if I want to do a project in summer project, can tell me. The person said, I'm trying to find bacteria in the stomach, but stomach has since very low pH. There's a lot of acids, so no bacteria should technically survive out there. So we are trying to look for it. Do you want to do this work? The work may not be very fruitful. Do you want to? He said, okay, fine, I'll do that. So endoscopy had also come up that very time. So he would get biopsies from the endoscopy room and try to culture them so as to grow bacteria. So 3, 4, 5 weeks, nothing happened, and he was losing patience anyway. So one day he took the samples, put it out there, and he went home for the Easter holidays. Because earlier he used to throw the culture plates after 24 hours or 48 hours. So when he came back from Easter holidays, he found there were bacteria growing out there because the culture plates, it's a difficult to grow organism. So culture plates for a longer time, and the bacteria grew. So subsequently, they named it Helicobacter pylori, and they found that that was the cause of peptic ulcer disease. And these two both gentlemen, the professor and the student, they got the Nobel Prize for medicine or physiology somewhere in 2003, 4, or somewhere at that time.
I've
And in
heard, sir,
fact,
they drank it also, I think, to prove the point.
yeah, you're very right. So what Barry Marshall did was, the Barry Marshall said that, okay, we have to prove. So there are certain Koch's postulates. So there are certain ways by which you say that bacteria is a definite cause for disease. So he isolated that organism, ingested it. After a few days, he says it seems that he had sort of abdominal pain. So he got a scopy done, endoscopy done. They took a biopsy and were able to grow Helicobacter pylori from there. That time they had named it Campylobacter and subsequently named it Helicobacter. So, but after that, he started treating peptic ulcer with just antibiotics. And as a result, the prevalence of peptic ulcer dropped dramatically. So similarly in IBD, I won't be surprised 3, 4, 5 years if not this kind of known factor, but some kind of treatment which would immediately radicalize the treatment and take away all the sufferings in one go.
That will be a good thing.
Yeah, I'm very hopeful about it.
Yes, sir. And so, how often should the patients follow up with the doctor after they get some symptomatic relief, or let's say the doctor says that now you're in clinical remission. So after that, how often should the patient follow up?
If somebody is in clinical remission, I think once in 6 months should be fine. Till the time they do not go into clinical remission depends upon how active the disease is. If the disease is very active, maybe sometimes you have to follow up once a week, once in 2 weeks, and then once every 3 months. But even if you are doing very well, there is no harm in going to the doctor once every 6 months for sure.
And sir, what about colonoscopies? So after you are in remission, do we need regular colonoscopies?
So colonoscopy is needed initially. Secondly, at times when there's a relapse and you're not very sure what is the cause of relapse, is it because of disease activity? Is it because of some infection which has supervened? And you also want to find out whether there are any deep ulcers out there. And colonoscopy helps in guiding treatment. So there you may do a sigmoidoscopy or a colonoscopy. Sigmoidoscopy is a short version of colonoscopy where you're seeing only 30, 40 centimeters. That is enough. So then thereafter, after 10 years of disease, 8 to 10 years of disease in ulcerative colitis, or if Crohn's is disease which is affecting the colon, a screening colonoscopy should be done every after 8 to 10 years, and then every 2 to 5 years, depending from patient to patient, so that you would also like to find out if not only the disease has progressed, the disease at times may be may turn into colorectal cancer or something like that. So you have to screen for that. That is very essential. Regular colonoscopy in a patient who is in remission is generally not necessary, but however, even if it has to be done, that is a sigmoidoscopy. I think a very important point here is that if you can do an unprepared sigmoidoscopy, because that is much less bothersome, that does not involve upsetting the milieu so much, and most of the time the relevant information can be had with the unprepared sigmoidoscopy also.
So regarding that disturbing, so basically, if you are in remission and let's say I'm feeling some symptoms and I go to the doctor and they say, okay, let's do a colonoscopy. So do I need to worry about that colonoscopy worsening my condition further because of that, all that prep and all that? Like, are they unstabilizing agents? Do they destabilize the condition?
So again, there has to be definite indication for the procedure. So an alternative which is now available is a non-invasive test known as fecal calprotectin. That is a stool test which in which you can measure the amount of inflammation, and it correlates fairly very well with mucosal ulcers and healing. The only negative point out there is that that test is still very expensive. It costs 2 to 3,000 rupees from center to center. So till the time that test, the cost drops to 200, 400 rupees. Obviously, it is a problem. It is an issue, like the cost of the test. So colonoscopy, again, as I told you, that if one can get away with unprepared sigmoidoscopy, that is better, because that in a case of ulcerative colitis, rectum is the most affected area, and if you're not screening for anything else, you're just looking for activity and you want to find out if there's any superimposed infection, then that is sufficient, right? Colonoscopy by itself should not be a disturbing factor, but then when if you drink 2 liters of fluid, the preparation and all those things, that can upset the milieu a little bit, in terms of patients do get an increase in bowel frequency for a few days if you are going into the full preparation, and subsequently for a few days it may do. So there has to be definite indication. So you have to weigh. If the indication is more important, it has to be done.
And so, lot of times it happens that the doctor is struggling to, you know, uh, come up to a diagnosis, and many times it happens that the initial meds are not working. It's like 2 हफ्ता हो गया and 3 हफ्ता 3 हफ्ता हो गया, meds are not working, so patients get, you know, impatient. so तो उस condition में should we just change our doctors, or like uh, uh, अपने current doctors, like should I continue to work with my current doctor, like how long should I stay with my current doctor? These all questions, like how do patients
So
navigate that?
it's a chronic disease. So it's always good to have a doctor whom you trust. Secondly, if the doctor has time for you, there can be nothing better than that, right? Third is that you'll have to go to the doctor again and again. So it's always better if you stick to one person, but provided that you feel good with that person and you trust that person, because you have to understand the limitations of the doctor also. In terms of, the doctor does not have a magic
Yeah.
wand or something. He'll try his best. He or she would try their best. So medicines, if they are not working, I would suggest first to change the medicines rather than changing the doctor, because that would be more beneficial. However, at the same time, as I told you, if you're seeing a physician and medicines are not working, then obviously you should go to a gastroenterologist. If it's a complicated IBD case and still things are not working out, then it may be better to seek intermittently opinion of a person who has interest in IBD, the field of IBD, and maybe follow up with the same gastroenterologist who is near you, in your vicinity. And if you build up that way, like this is a lifelong relationship between a doctor and a patient. It's a very sacred lifelong relationship. So it is important that way, that changing doctors may not help so much if you trust the doctor. So there, yes, you can have a dialogue in terms of whether you would like to wait for some time in terms of changing medication, or you feel that you are reasonably in a lot of discomfort and you want quicker relief. So perhaps a change in medication would be required, because again, it may be counterproductive. It's something like, for sometimes for a physician to provide good relief, it is easier to give steroids. Somebody may say, okay, if I give you steroids, if you have a relapse, somebody has a relapse, I give you steroids. You know the effect, there's a good chance effect will come in 3 days. The person will feel better. But then if the indication is not very strong, then that is not good for the patient. Instead, for 7 or 8 days with the lower level drugs and steroids, if you can achieve some amount of response, that would be much better.
Yes, sir.
So similarly, for somebody may step up to biologicals very fast, which may not be required just to give better control. So a dialogue is necessary out here. Dialogue, trust, empathy, and trust from both sides. Then that works the best. Yeah.
Okay. And
Accessibility of the doctor is very important again.
yes. Regarding that, sir, I think someone asked, like, if IBD OPDs are now functioning, are they in AIMS or other hospitals? Are they functioning?
Yeah, fully functioning. Last week we ran our OPD till 7:30 in the evening, started at 1 p.m. So what we are doing, however, is that earlier we were running two full afternoon OPDs. Now one day we have right now converted to teleconsultation because the lockdown and subsequent COVID period taught us that all those patients, let's say, were coming from, since AIMS, you have a catchment area full of North India. So let's say somebody is coming from Assam, somebody is coming from Bihar, then if they are in remission, all they need is ki, okay, should we continue the medicine, any test to be done. So teleconsultation would be really good in terms of saving them so much time, saving them the botheration and all those things. So now we run a teleconsultation half a day, whereby all those patients are they can consult on phone, and amongst them we feel that okay, these are the ones who need to be seen physically, then we call.
Okay.
So I think, and gradually, like the Diet app, we are the process of getting another app also out, which you can stay with the patient, and all the data would be there, so that a teleconsult, more half of the work can be done on a teleconsultation.
Okay. So my next question is, should I be able to self-monitor my IBD, and how do I do it? Are there any blood tests that I can get done regularly?
So you can easily self-monitor yourself. Self-monitoring is obviously as one is on the basis of your symptoms. Then point of care fecal calprotectin tests are available. Right, that one is with your smartphone. You click a photograph and subsequently that test, that is around 1200 rupees or something. That test, I think, if you buy in bulk, is 1000 or 1200 or maybe slightly more. But you can easily do it. For example, you're far away from the hospital. Let's say you don't want to go to the hospital. You're having certain symptoms, you tell your symptoms, at the same time you do a fecal calprotectin, which is point of care test available. The point of care means you can do it at your own home. Click
Kit
a
type.
snap of it with the help of there's a kit, then you click a snap of it with a smartphone, it will give you a reading, and then you can show that it is transmit that reading to your doctor so that he can take a decision whether to upgrade your medicines or not. Similarly, simple blood tests which may be done: hemoglobin, serum albumin, that is albumin decides how much of protein stores are there, hemoglobin, ESR, or a total leukocyte count, that is the number of WBCs which are there. You can be done every 6 months. But as I told you, if you are if you still want to monitor yourself, still once a year, definitely go to the doctor, because there are certain issues which obviously a person who specializes in that field would be able to answer for you and take cognizance of that.
And so, what about CRP, and how do this CRP and like fecal calprotectin compare against each other? Like, which is a better indicator?
CRP is a not simpler, it is a less expensive test, but there is no doubt fecal calprotectin is far superior to CRP,
Okay.
I would say. And so fecal calprotectin is definitely a better test. It's only a matter of time before the cost comes down. And as the point of care tests are already available, then you can clearly have domiciliary care and teleconsultations half of the times.
And so sometimes people have no symptoms, but if when they measure the CRP or FCP, so it's high. So is it telling that they are about to have a flare up?
So yes, in that cases, one would like to repeat a FCP after a period of time. Just one value should not be sufficient unless, so one would like to repeat it after, let's say, three. If there's no increase in symptoms after 4 weeks, if you are having two FCP levels which are high, then yes, you may think about it. So that is a time when the physician would say कि चलो भाई sigmoidoscopy करके देख लेते हैं, because it's quite possible you may not be having clinical symptoms, but you may have developed activity inside, and if you find there's activity, then you can upgrade to that.
Okay. And another question is, I think like it's not about treatment, but
Um,
basically about my, as a doctor at AIMS, like you have been treating IBD patients since so long, and you have seen so many patients. So I think that is what we wonder about most of the time. Like, what is life going to be like with IBD? And uh, there is this thing also, like among patients, we often tell that before, like, we often forget who we were before IBD. So, like, do we have to abandon that life, and what does our long term life look like? Like, how much hope is there for us?
so the IBD you can divide into two things: aggressive and non-aggressive. A vast majority, actually, I would say 70%, 80% is non-aggressive. For those people who have a non-aggressive IBD, means just taking few medications, little bit quality of life issues, right? And coming to the doctor once in 6 months and all. So there, I think, in the sense that it becomes a way of life for them. Issue arises that okay, for the people who have aggressive IBD, for aggressive IBD, it is requires special strengths from the person. There's no doubt. It requires emotional support from people around. It requires all these things. It requires, that is where I said that mental strength is extremely, extremely important. It is your power of resilience which you develop over a period of time when you go through relapse or multiple relapses and you take medicines. Like you're young, you maybe somebody is in 8, somebody is in 12, somebody is starting their job, and then they have it, somebody are planning to get married, and it is a equanimity of the mind, the resilience, the attitude. Then the attitude kicks in, and I have seen it happening, my dear. For example, you are one example. We talk about that, what a positive attitude, and we really admire it.
I think, like, I don't say this much, but I think there was a lot from your side also.
No, 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 no. It is from totally from your side, and so that is what actually, that positive attitude, that mental resilience, that ability to stand up, and that attitude. Okay, I'm going to, makes a very, very important thing, role to play in people who have aggressive attitude. Now, I can think of many examples, like for example, young people, 22 साल 23 साल का हो गया, फिर वो कहता है कि अब मैं शादी करूंगा नहीं करूँ, पेरेंट्स आएंगे कि शादी. I've always told them, you have to go ahead and lead an absolutely normal life. Go ahead and get married. And so next, the tricky question comes, and this is now a practical question. There's a question of practicality, pragmatism, and ethics, all three combined. But this is a, obviously it's a major issue which is then faced कि भाई वो लड़की वाले पूछते कि हम लड़के को बताएं कि नहीं बताएं फैमिली को. लड़के वाले बोलते हैं कि हम लड़की को जिससे भी शादी हो रही है, whether we should tell or not. So obviously our advice is कि it's best to tell, because later on there may be problems. And at the same time, if you want, then the other people, the girl side or the boy side can come to us and we can explain to them that it is a disease which can be handled, and in terms of planning family and all, there should not be a problem, and the chances of transmission are only 2% or 3% or less, so it is not a major issue. So that also helps in a way. But at the same time, what I've seen is that many of the people later have realized they've gone ahead, because it's not their fault. It is somewhere when you're against a wall, then you take certain decisions, and they've gone ahead and married without telling their partner initially. It is not, I won't say that that's in any way a wrong thing at all. It is just that the circumstances are such that you want to lead a normal life and you say. And I have seen many a times also, okay, that the spouses or the partners have very well accepted them later on also. And so it is the will to lead an absolutely good life, that is the overriding force. So once you decide that, then you get your partners of choice, you also get your working environment and all those kind of things do then start in a way settling automatically themselves for you. This is what I have seen for most of the patients. Whereas the same kind of hope in elderly patients, I have found sometimes that they do not have. Somebody who gets IBD at the age of 60, 70 or something, and they have an aggressive disease, they do not have such a this kind of thing. Where the young, they're always full of hope, and that hope decides the difference in what is going to happen to the disease. So it is holistic approach, which is important. It is not only medicines, it is also your talks with your doctor, your sincerity in terms of okay taking medicines, that is obviously there, your sincerity in terms of leading a healthy life. कि भाई ये नहीं कि रिस्ट्रिक्टिव होना है बिल्कुल कि कुछ भी नहीं खाना है, बट हाँ भाई हेल्दी खाना खाना है, एक्सरसाइज वगैरह, इन टर्म्स ऑफ नॉट maintaining your this thing, and a positive outlook, that really goes along.
Okay, so we just have two more questions, sir. One of them is a viewer question. So because of Crohn's and ulcerative, many people have some muscle pain and protein loss also, and people take these protein powders also. So are there any long-term side effects of this like
So
supplements?
people, so what we do is that your enteral nutrition, this is what we call as enteral nutrition. So it is not to take only protein powders, but you have what are known as semi elemental diet. So this is like, for example, those who have extensive intestinal involvement, so as a result, they have low albumin levels or low hemoglobin levels. For them, it is very good. These enteral formulas, the liquid-based enteral formulas, so that you have okay a tin every day, and that really helps in terms of building up, because this has all the we are not talking of the protein powders which are available in gym or something, which people who go to the gym and all, they would take a lot of creatinine or protein powders. No, these are complete feeds, except for a certain period of time. If the intestine is really damaged, then for 2 or 3 months they are put on exclusive enteral nutrition or partial enteral nutrition. ऐसे partial की ठीक है कि वो उससे कुछ calories वो powder से ले लिया, बाकी थोड़ा semi solid खाना खा के, so as to build them up. So for periods of time they're very helpful, particularly when person is malnourished, the nutritional reserves are low. Yes, they're very helpful, but not only the protein powder. Protein powder, fine, if you're doing well, you want to take protein powder as such as anybody else, you are most welcome to take them.
And what about muscle aches, sir? Like, is it related to Crohn's or like?
Yeah, muscle aches is, for example, you may have calcium deficiency if somebody has been on steroids, vitamin D deficiency, it may be there. As such, because of the disease, there's a term known as sarcopenia, where there may be a loss of muscle mass. So, or if there's low hemoglobin, that can cause muscle aches. So, you have to correct all these things. So, you have to correct the hemoglobin, you have to correct the calcium, vitamin D, and take a holistic diet, which should help.
Okay, sir. So my final question would be like, I didn't send you in the questionnaire, but like, so ever since we started, so basically this was not just for patients, it's for the public also to understand us, like who we are, because as young people, it impacts our ability to mix in and like socialize with others, find partners and all, live a life. So if you had to talk to know like other people, like let's say other healthy people, people in the 20s and 30s who don't know what people with IBD are like, so what would you tell them, like who are we, and like are we really that much of a burden that like they can't accept us? So what would you tell them, like what would you want to say to the public about us?
No, it's not at all. I don't think there's any question of burden or something like that. For example, so okay, in the sense ki one is that let's get the self-esteem totally on the correct right scale out here. There's absolutely nothing out here, because that is it. This disease tries to scare you by making a dent at your self-esteem, and that because it occurs when you're in the most impressionable ages, right? And when it occurs, then obviously you feel there's a big dent in self-esteem, and it is a self-esteem loss that boomerangs back at you, where you think that other people are thinking that way. No, they are not. You know what? Swami Vivekananda, I think he said that everything is a circle. There's no linear line. Everything is a circle. So if you're going to throw love around, you're going to get love. If you're going to throw hate around, you're going to get hate. If you're going to throw low self-esteem around, you're going to get low self-esteem. If you're going to say, okay, fine, there is an issue, we are dealing with that issue, fine, and that's it. And you are confident about it, and you do not let that affect your self-esteem. If you're mentally very strong, then the same strengths would come back to you. The same strengths would rebound back to you. It's a circle. If you throw hate around, you get hate. If you throw love around, you get love. If you throw enthusiasm around, you get enthusiasm. So similarly out here, if you say, fine, you're not hiding it. So some people are young diabetics. 12-year-old kid, they would have diabetes, they would be putting insulin. There would be 8-year-old kid who will be having such thick glasses, power of 8, 10 or something like that, whereby, right? At the same time, there would be people who would be absolutely healthy, but their minds may not be that active. At the same time, there would be a group of somebody who would be having like healthy and all those kind of things, but there would be something else missing out there. So what comes, you accept it first. Don't be harsh on yourself. It's something like even the topmost tycoons can be harsh on themselves. Even for that matter of fact, somebody like Mark Zuckerberg or somebody can be harsh on himself. He is number 2 or number 3 only in the list, and he's not becoming number 1. And this is happening, and that is happening. So the moment you accept yourself, you're not harsh on yourself, and you don't think that what others are thinking. You think of what you are thinking. That will come back. If I walk into a room and I think that okay, I am looking, I'm wearing this shirt, so I'm looking extremely bad, then obviously that body language shows on me. When the body language shows on me, then others will also think about it. Whereas if I do not think about myself that way, so then the body language would be different. Yes, I do agree that there is a people who have an aggressive disease. Obviously, there's an issue. There's we're not in any way decreasing the magnitude of the problem which we have. But yes, we are elevating our mental status and how we are going to react to that. What is our attitude to it? How we are going to react to that, and our reaction to that problem is going to decide everything. So there we have to build up a very confident, strong, positive reaction. And generally, that's what I'm saying. That has been my experience over the years in terms of talking to patients. All those who build up that kind of this thing, instead of defense reflexes, all those who build up these kind of proactive kind of these things, the things also start falling down for them. They'll find a partner, the ye bhi ho jayega, wo bhi ho jayega, and then they'll be generally then they would be settled, they would be comfortable. So first of all, don't be harsh. Accept yourself. If you have accepted yourself, there's nobody in the world who will not accept you.
Thank you, sir.
The strength lies within you, the answer lies within you.
So a bit of philosophy, a bit of medicine. Yeah. So thank you, sir. Thank you for all this motivating. And obviously we have a lot of questions, but I think we have run out of time. And I hope that like we often have the discussions about mental health also. But I think we need more of that. And I also hope that when World IBD Day comes, you'll join us for more of like this kind of talk also. And frankly, like even when I was in the worst condition at AIIMS, like your words are really soothing. So I think that played a big role, because I don't know how I would have made it. So I'm very grateful for that. So
Not at all, not at all, Nikhil. I tell you truthfully, I am grateful to you that you are doing so well.
no, sir.
For a doctor to know कि okay भाई वो उस time ऐसी condition थी, आज he's doing so well. Is sort of sometimes is like the best thing which can be.
Yes, sir, but that was because of you. Like it's all all your part. Like, so I think that's why you talked about the dialogue and the trust and the communication, because there were a lot of times where I felt like confused and like how is this if I were going to live, like I really didn't think I would like live another year or something, but every year it would be like
You're doing very well.
something.
You're doing very well, and you're right now also support for so many people.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Yes, sir. So I think like that thing where you need to have a good doctor who listens to you, and also you have to have faith in your doctor. Things will become hard, and it's a journey, like it's a long journey. So
Journey. And you have to realize the doctor also has their limitations because there are
yeah,
limited drugs available.
yeah.
Often
And in our country, there are a lot of limitations on the doctor. So it's a communication from both ways. And obviously, we are also trying to improve that situation. Let's see how
I think your
how
support group
successful
is
we are.
very important for patients of IBD in the country, because the way your support group can handle lots of these kind of things which are beyond the reach of a physician, like, or the physician may not have time to even think
Yeah.
about that. So these are things which you should highlight, and then you can rope in we can rope in IBD people from across the country so that they can chip in this
Yes,
way.
sir.
It can be a good interactive.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much for your support and
Yeah.
for all the time you give to us and all these motivating words, because uh, usually it's just like technical talk, but this kind of talk really helps patients connect more with their doctors and like gives us hope that things will be well.
So
So
actually everything would be well.
yeah.
Let us just keep on trying and it would be fine.
Yes.
Absolutely fine.
So thank you,
Okay.
sir, and hope we'll see
Okay.
you again some other time.
Thank you. Look forward to further next interactions
Yeah.
with your group.
Thank you,
Okay.
sir.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye.